This is the Texas Pete Scoreboard Show. I'm Bob Pacello, joined by Hans Heiser. Texas Pete, drama for your mouth. And Hans, I'd like to say there was a whole lot of drama in the SEC last night. And there was late at night in Baton Rouge and in College Station. But man, in Knoxville and in Tuscaloosa, just one-sided affairs that got ugly in a hurry, depending on who you're rooting for.
Think about Alabama and what they've done the last couple of weeks. If there was any doubt about what this team was going to be this year, I thought after the first game against Florida State, I thought maybe offensively they might take a step back. And I know that's tough to say when you look at the running backs they have, and of course, the quarterback coming back for his sophomore year. But Florida State's defense is all that. But they have not taken their foot off the metal. This is the Alabama revenge tour, in case you haven't noticed. They are upset about losing to Clemson last year. And you can tell, man, these guys are focused. They're dialed in, and you look at their schedule the rest of the way, and it's easy sailing all the way to the Iron Bowl.
It is easy, or appears to be. But I'll tell you what, they may get that revenge against Clemson the way things are going, man.
But that LSU game's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough, Bob. LSU.
Yeah, that's a quality, well-coached team. We'll talk about that a bit later in the show. We'll hand out some game balls. Hans will tell us which coach slept well last night, which one didn't. But want to take you to the Texas Pete Scoreboard. Spice up your tailgate with Texas Pete. Want to start in Knoxville, Georgia. Goes up to Tennessee and just hammers the Vols 41-0. Tennessee's first shutout of any kind in 23 years. And Georgia just dominated every aspect of this game.
You got to be excited if you're a Georgia fan. This is exactly what you've been waiting for the last 10 years almost. I mean, you had the one nice year with Aaron Murray where you're one play away from playing for a national championship, but I think there were a lot of question marks around this team last year. What kind of quarterback was Jacob Eason going to be? He gets hurt. Fromm has stepped in, and I think he's gotten better each and every week. But, the storyline for this Georgia team this year, Bob, without a doubt, man, is this defense. These guys are gang tackling. As soon as you see a guy on the opposing team, guy makes contact with him, there's 7 Bulldogs hanging off of him in less than 2 seconds. So the defense is making plays, they're making stops, and then when you do that, you just run the football. And that's what Georgia's been doing. It's not rocket science. It's a formula that's worked for them so far, and I don't expect them to change anything.
Well, Nick Chubb returns to the scene of the crime where he got hurt 2 years ago. He runs for over 100 yards. Georgia D holds Tennessee to 178 yards of total offense. Butch Jones says it's the worst offensive performance he's ever seen.
That's saying a lot for Butch Jones. He's seen a few of them.
Oh, man. Hey, you're a funny guy.
I knew it was coming.
How good is this Georgia team? Are you ready to say that this Georgia team is on par with Alabama?
Man, I don't know about on par with Alabama, but defensively, I think it's maybe a 5-team conversation right now when you look nationally. Auburn yesterday, I think their defense, they're outstanding, by the way. We'll talk a little bit more about them. But Auburn, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson again last night. You saw what they did. And then you got some Big Ten schools up there. Michigan's got a nice defense. But, I mean, the way that – how about Georgia just being in that conversation? From where they were, it's incredible, the transformation and the turnaround, and the fact that Kirby's got these guys to buy in such a short turnaround here in year 2 is incredible. Real quick about Nick Chubb. 2 years ago when that injury happened, one of the most horrific injuries I've ever seen. I mean, honestly, I thought he was done playing football. The fact that he came back, he decided to stay for his senior year. I think the reason that this Georgia team is bought into Kirby Smart's philosophy, if you will, is because of the senior leadership that they have. That front 7 on defense is laden with upperclassmen. You have the Nick Chubb, Sony Michel factor, those guys coming back. This is a very experienced football team outside of the quarterback position, and I think when you have those guys in college football, it helps for everybody else to buy into what the coach is selling. And they're bought in, man. Yesterday was a game in years past Georgia would have found a way to lose. Not lose, but at least make it more interesting than going out there and making the statement they did yesterday.
Of course, we want your comments, and I want to go right to those right now. Jessica says, hey, we're good, but we're not Bama good. And
it's well said, Jessica.
Carrie Lawn says, Florida's still in first place. Have to beat us first. Yeah, you're technically correct, Gary, but that day is going to come here soon enough. I'll answer the question since you didn't answer the question. Is Georgia, Alabama good?
No, I let off the question was saying no, they're not. They're not in that conversation yet.
You kind of avoided the question a little bit. Well, here's why. I think they're 22. They're 22 starters. They're right there with Alabama. You know, Fromm is still a little bit more inexperienced than Jalen Hurts, but the thing that I think Georgia has to be wary of is injuries. If Georgia doesn't, thank you.
Yeah.
If Georgia doesn't suffer injuries, I'm not sure that this team doesn't ride into an SEC championship game undefeated. Alabama has suffered, a ton of injuries defensively, and Nick Saban has substitutes. He just puts these guys in, and it's like clockwork. They're ready to play. I'm not sure at this point in time that Georgia has that luxury, specifically on the offensive line.
Yeah, well, Georgia's good. They're young up front. And they're going to continue to get better as the season goes along. And I thought yesterday and even the week before against Mississippi State, it was a statement game, just to show the Georgia fans and to show the rest of the SEC that they're not going to. It's not the Georgia of years past. You know what I mean? They're not going to fall down and play to their competition. And I do want to mention one thing real quick. You saw Miami play on Friday night against Duke, right? Mark Richt seems to be having a lot of fun out there. But Georgia is better off without Mark Richt, and Mark Richt appears to be better off without Georgia. So in college football, the years of having these guys, around 10, 15 years and they're gone. Nick Saban is the exception. I mean, he is the only guy that's been able to sustain this for as long as he has. And when you get a young up-and-coming coach and guys buying in a team in a program that can recruit the way Georgia is, sky's the limit, man. There's no reason to say that you can't be Alabama moving forward. But right now they're not in that conversation. But you're going to get a shot. I do feel you're going to get a shot against Alabama in the SEC championship.
Well, As a third party looking in, you got to be excited about this Georgia defense if you're a Georgia fan, because they are playing Alabama quality defense. These guys run to the football, the effort is there, and it looks like a Nick Saban defense. And a lot of credit not only to Kirby Smart, but Mel Tucker, defensive coordinator, because he's got his stamp on this defense that wasn't quite there last year. It's there now.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Tucker, because we were watching the game yesterday, and my buddy says, it's not going to be long for somebody comes calling him. And that's the other thing about Saban I don't think it's talked about enough, is year after year after year, he's having to replace coaches. To keep his staff together, but that comes with success, and Dabo's seeing a little bit of it in Clemson right now. But Tucker's going to be a guy you'd have to think, with the success he's had this year and the way that they play, he's a young guy too, that, he could be a head coach one day. So just a full credit to the job of the whole coaching staff, the strength and conditioning. These guys seem to be in phenomenal shape. And everyone wants to talk about this front seven. I think the secondary for Georgia this year has made plays, man. They attack that football. They don't let wide receivers grab it. They're always going for the turnover. It's just a lot of fun to watch. I mean, they're a very well-coached team, especially on that side of the ball.
Last week it was Baker who had the amazing game. Yesterday it was McGee, who
right
was
off the
all
bat.
over the place. The great pick early on. Roquan Smith has 11 tackles in the game. All right, I want to get back to the comments. Matt Adams, let's just put it right out there. Matt says, do you think Butch will be fired today? And if so, who will be the interim?
I don't know who will be the interim. You said Scott probably?
Yeah. He did the interim job down at Miami a few years back, did a nice job.
Yeah.
Of course, you have some veteran coaches on the staff who could potentially take over.
I don't think he makes it through today. I really don't. I want to say one thing.
Are you better off firing him today as opposed to waiting till later on in the season?
Yes. I think from a recruiting
standpoint,
standpoint, lost the team? I think he's lost the team. No, I don't want to say that, because I think that they're really limited with what they can do. They've been leaning on their defense to keep them in games. Very easy to win that Florida game. They competed yesterday. I know you look at the score and you say, well, wait a second. They lost at home 41-0, worst home loss in over 100 years, right? First time they've been shut out at home that way since 1905. But they didn't quit. Do you know what I mean? Like they were out there, they were still playing hard. So I don't want to say he's lost the team, but from a confidence standpoint at this point, these kids got to be like, what are we playing for? What's the future? And if you're a recruit, you don't know who your head coach is going to be. It's easier listen, if it didn't cost $9.2 million, they would have already moved on. But the buyout is what it is, and that's going to be the holdup. They have to make a decision whether they want to spend that money now or at the end of the season.
Well, I don't think their talent is 41 points different than Georgia. Obviously, it's not.
Right.
But they are so pedestrian at key positions such as quarterback. Dormady, solid quarterback, but he's not the guy that's going to be elevating his teammates. And unfortunately, that shows this year that he just doesn't have the supporting cast. You know, you put him behind Alabama's offensive line, and he's gonna win you football games.
Right.
Put him behind Tennessee's offensive line, which isn't as physical as it has been in the past. And Tennessee's skill position, Callaway dropped the pass last night. Gotta love Kelly. Man, that kid is...
Georgia shut him down. That was it. But there was no plan B.
If you got no one else.
Right. That's the thing. You know, the cupboard is bare there. And I'll ask you this, Bob, and we'll ask our viewers out there, what kind of job is Tennessee these days? Are the expectations in line with what the job actually is? Right?
I don't have an answer to that. I think if I'm a Tennessee fan, yeah, I'm always going to think my team is going to compete for a conference championship.
Did you see that guy?
Every single year.
Did you see that guy giving him the business, holding the paper bag, going in the locker room at halftime? It's gone viral. It's all over the place. It just encapsulates the frustration of Tennessee football right now. But, you know, who's the guy? You go back to when, they get rid of Fulmer, 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was, and they have not recovered. I mean, they have not recovered ever since then. And so I think that, when Georgia made the decision to get rid of Mark Richt, that's still got to be in the back of your mind. Like, are we really going to be better off by getting rid of him? And if we do, we got to make sure we have the right guy. And Tennessee's thought that a couple times. You can tell because of the financial commitments they've made to these guys, and they've been wrong.
David Cutcliffe was the guy, in my opinion, years ago.
And Ole Miss as well.
And they never gave David Cutcliffe a shot. They offered him the job, so I'm told, a few years down the line after he'd already established himself at Duke. But I'm just wondering how this program would be different if David Cutcliffe was the guy immediately.
He's a great football coach. He's a great football coach, great guy. But he's settled in at Duke now.
He's too old to be doing that now, and he's settled in at Duke, like you're saying. He's winning at Duke. Come on,
right.
Man, they lost to Miami, but they're 3-1.
Right, they compete. You're absolutely right. That's a good call on him. So I don't know if you make a splash. You go outside the conference. You bring in a guy who maybe. Not your
Chip Kelly, right?
Right, Chip Kelly, Mike Leach. If Mike Leach is crazy enough to want to come back, to come to the Southeastern Conference, I think a guy like that, much like Kevin Sumlin when he first came in.
The fan base at Tennessee would hate Mike Leach. They would not have fun with it. Unless,
you
win big.
Winning
does
man.
Cure everything.
Winning cures everything.
He's a quirky guy.
But I think just for the name alone, Jim Bob Cooter has to be in the conversation because you're talking about, in the southeastern part of the country.
Just the name alone.
We got a Jimbo, we got a Dabo, we got a Kirby. I just think Jim Bob would kind of complete the cycle.
All right, let's take you back to the Texas Pete scoreboard. Texas Pete, spice up your tailgate. Auburn beats up on Mississippi State, and this was not, I expected a little bit closer game than 49-10. Jarrett Stidham continues to complete passes at an amazing rate. He was 13 of 16. Kerryon Johnson rushes for over 100 yards, 4 rushing TDs for the team on the ground. Defense solid again. If you're Auburn, right, it looks like the offense is catching up to the defense.
Yeah, their offense is going to get better as the season goes along. I thought the game plan was interesting yesterday where Stidham airing it out a little bit. Mississippi State coming in this game, number 9 defensively in pass defense. You wouldn't think that would be their plan of attack, but they aired it out. Stidham, I think, 261 passer rating yesterday, highest for a quarterback at Auburn in 4 or 5 years. Had 4 passes over 45 yards yesterday, so they really took the top off of that Mississippi State secondary. I think that was a confidence builder for him in this Auburn offense. But defensively, man, they're lights out. They get after it. I think they drew 7 or 8 false starts yesterday from Mississippi State to say that they were a little bit intimidated and confused by what was coming at them. So Auburn so far, they continue to improve, and I do think that road test early in the year at Clemson is an opportunity for a young football team, particularly on offense, to learn from and grow as the season goes along.
All right, back to the comments. Amanda Fancher, how do you think UGA and Auburn match up?
That's the one everybody's looking at, right?
No, they're actually looking at Alabama. A lot of people are discounting Auburn. No, I agree.
They all play each other there at the end. They're all going to.
How do you think they match up?
Well, I think defensively, I think they're pretty even.
Game, of course, is being played
in Auburn. Yeah, game's in Auburn. I think right now, if you put a line on that game, I think Auburn would probably be a 2-point favorite. just for the fact that
they're at home.
That they're at home.
Usually home is a 3-point swing.
Correct. And I think that Georgia on a neutral field is probably the better team. But, the home field advantage. But you throw all that stuff out with the rivalry of those two teams. But I do think, like I say, Auburn's going to continue to get better. Real quick on the Georgia thing, you were surprised to see Eason come in at the end of the game?
I was, just to throw that one pass.
He did it again. He had a guy
wide open in the right corner.
For me to you, and he's got to throw it 100 miles an hour. Why can't he just put air under the ball? Sorry.
Well, he picked the wrong receiver to start with.
Sure.
But yeah, the guy he did throw to wasn't open. I can't even remember who it was at this point in time. But
right.
I think that in one pass play shows you why Fromm is the starting quarterback.
No question. No question. I mean, I wanted to mention that while we were talking about the Georgia game, that he did in fact come back. So he is healthy now.
Chronological here. If you'd actually have brought that up, I'd be a lot happier with it.
Okay, well, it's not too late. I might throw something else at you that's completely offbeat.
All right, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on Mississippi State because Bulldogs are what they are, but they've been outscored after blowing out LSU, and we thought at the time, wow, this is a pretty good team. Last two games combined.
That guy's the Cobra Kai right there.
Yes. Gus Malzahn, by the way, his seat is not so hot anymore.
Right. I thought that was so funny at the beginning of the year when his name was being mentioned with Butch Jones, Kevin Sumlin, even Bielema, to an extent. Some people call him for his head. Gus Malzahn's a guy who's had tremendous success as a head football coach there at Auburn. He recruits at a high level. Offensively, they're going to put up points, and now he's got a defense. I thought that was laughable. This is a football team that's going the right direction. Mississippi State, by the way, they're not anything to be bragging about. They're not that good of a football team.
Outscored 86-17.
They're one-dimensional.
The last 2 weeks.
Georgia exposed them.
Hey, Nick Fitzgerald, put us on your back and take us somewhere.
I tell you what, he was on his back a lot yesterday.
He was.
He got licked. I'm telling you, 33 pass attempts for Mississippi State. If you look at the box score after the game, that is not a recipe for success. That means they got down early. They weren't able to do what they like to do. It's exactly what Georgia had put a blueprint on the field last Saturday on how to beat Mississippi State. And unfortunately, they play in the Western Division of the Southeastern Conference. So there's some athletic guys over there that are going to be able to, execute that game plan as well.
Okay, I'm going to do what you did and backtrack.
Let's do it.
As I go to comments, Jed Cowan coaches for Tennessee. He says, Les Miles, Mike Bobo, Troy's head coach for the Colts.
For Tennessee.
Yeah.
Right.
For the Vols, he says calls. Anyway.
We know what you're talking about, sir.
Mike Bobo would be a great choice. We both agree, I think, on that. We talked about it last week. And Les Miles, not so much. And
how old is Les Miles?
He's in his mid-60s.
Is he really?
Yeah.
He looks good for mid-60.
He
really does. No, I thought he was a little bit younger than that. But
I do want to talk a little bit later in the show about Troy's head coach, Neil Brown, because I think Neil Brown is he's going to be moving up probably after this season.
Yeah, well, LSU might be looking for a coach as well. We'll talk a little bit more about them coming up in just a bit. But Mississippi State, hey, look, you had a nice start to the season. You got some winnable games left on your schedule. Dan Mullen, he's a great coach. They're going to be able to dictate, what they like to do to some of these opponents down the road. It's going to be a 7-8 win football team.
Jed did correct himself and say Vols. Thank you, Jed.
Thank you, Jed.
Let you take you back to the scoreboard. Texas Pete, spice up your tailgate with Texas Pete. Alabama, Ole Miss. It was what I thought it would be, 66-3.
It's exactly how we all called it. We saw this one coming a mile away, right?
Tide stops Ole Miss on its opening possession. They drive it down and score, and then they pick off the pass and return it for a touchdown. And this game is history. Here's the final yardage total from last night, 613 to 253. Ole Miss did not convert a third down. 0 for 13. Alabama hasn't turned over the football this season. Last week they run for 496 yards.
Wow.
Last night it's 365.
Well, and here's the other thing. They've outgained their opponents by 1,000 yards in the last 2 weeks. 1,000 yards.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. So
that's 10 football fields, I believe.
So what's the motivating factor for this football team? I mean, what does Nick selling them? Every year he says you empty the bucket, right? That was last year's team. This is a New Year's team. Every team is different, but it seems like he's spinning what happened last year in Clemson, the national championship game, is saying that was a fluke. okay? We got beat by a good football team that I still think that we were better than, but we're not going to give away anything else. We're on a mission. We're not just going to, try to appease our fan base and win each week, willy-nilly, whatever. We are out to destroy people, and that's what they've been doing so far.
All right. The Alabama-Georgia game that everyone's looking forward to, and we don't want to put the cart before the horse, but since you mentioned that Clemson loss last year, the one thing that Clemson had that Georgia didn't have is a dual-threat quarterback that historically has given Nick Saban defense fits. Georgia does not have that, and I think coming as we get closer to that potential undefeated matchup, I think that as a Georgia fan would concern me.
Yeah, I will say this. I thought Fromm made some plays with his feet yesterday.
He did. The two touchdown runs were great.
Yeah, he's a little bit more athletic than we give him credit for. Now, he's not a dual threat by any stretch of the imagination, but he's not a liability back there.
Absolutely
he's not a statue like Eason. And Eason's a talented guy as well. There's a place for him. He very well might be an elite NFL quarterback one day.
Might be a good quarterback with the Miami Hurricanes.
Yeah, or Washington State. Who knows? But I think yesterday with those plays that he made with his feet, I don't think that that's a liability for Georgia going into Alabama.
No,
I really
not
don't.
Dual threat, but he is not a liability with his feet. Speaking of quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts just seems to get better and better, makes better decisions. I know early on in the game he threw a pass that should have been picked off at the goal line. It wasn't, but he throws for 197 yards, a couple of touchdowns. He runs for 100 yards and a touchdown. It just seems like he is making better decisions every week.
Yeah, and he's got the it factor, too, as far as the leadership intangibles. Sometimes it's hard, or most often it's hard for a freshman to come in, especially at a place like Alabama, and assume any kind of leadership role, even if you are the quarterback. You kind of have to stay in your lane. But now that he's been there, he played for a national championship, in the conversation for a Heisman Trophy last year and again this year, you see a little bit more of the leadership out of him, commanding the huddle, pumping up his teammates on the sidelines, and he's a special young man. It's easy to see why Nick Saban brought him in.
I want to give a shout-out defensively to Micah Fitzpatrick, who led the team in tackles yesterday. A couple for losses. He did have a sack. Latest on defensive lineman, Deshaun Hand. It is an MCL strain, further evaluation, and we don't know enough yet on Trayvon Diggs, how serious his injury is. But Alabama is just a complete team at this point in time. Nick Saban's not going to say it, but I think his team, the last 2 weeks, it's the best 2-week stretch in his decade-long time at Alabama.
That's saying a lot.
How can you argue that?
That's saying a lot. And it just shows you how dialed in these guys are. Much like what you're seeing with Kirby Smart in Georgia and Alabama, they're not just finding ways to win and making plays here or there. They are dominating. Special teams, line of scrimmage, playmaking, protecting the quarterback. You name it, man. I mean, they are doing basically everything perfect. Well, I want to say this about Alabama. I mean, just outside of the Florida State game, okay, you got Fresno State, Colorado State, Vanderbilt, Ole Miss. Now, this week they go to Texas A&M, okay? I don't know that what do you think the line is on that game? 21?
No, not that high.
But they just beat.
But the game's at A&M. College Station is a crazy place.
18?
I was going to think 2 touchdowns.
2 touchdowns. Okay, well, we'll see.
You're a betting man.
I'm not a betting man. Thank God I'm not a betting man.
I'll take Alabama and give the points if you're going to give me 14, though.
You got Arkansas. You got 3 home games in a row if you're Alabama. Arkansas, Tennessee, LSU. You want to call that the hot seat stretch right there. All 3 of those coaches, just what they want to do when they're fighting for their jobs is going to Tuscaloosa. Yeah. Then they have at Mississippi State. Don't forget about the game against the Mercer Bears. That's going to be a tough one. And then, of course, at Auburn, the Iron Bowl. That's it. The Iron Bowl is their season. Iron Bowl SEC championship. That's it. It's
Auburn is Alabama's season right now. Auburn is Georgia's season as well. You get past that game, and you're playing in the SEC championship.
They really have separated themselves from the rest of the conference. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about Florida yesterday.
I was going to say, Florida fans, yeah, Florida can be a sticking point. I mean,
they're 3-0. They're in first place.
They are. They're in first place.
Can't argue with that. Just the facts, Bob.
All right, let's take you back to the Texas Pete scoreboard. Spice up your tailgate with Texas Pete. Troy beats LSU 24-21. Troy leads 17-0, led 24-7. just before halftime, very strange field goal for Troy. I don't know if you saw this. Receiver is down with 2 seconds left, and they basically let the clock run out, which I didn't think was a big deal. But
turned out to be everything.
Neil Brown just argued the point. They went up to the officials. While this whole thing is going on, Neil Brown sets up his field goal team. He's ready for this. And so the only way that they're going to get a field goal off is to be ready to snap that ball. Boom. They did. Field goal kicker from 37 yards actually hits the crossbar, just the weakest kick possible. But that turns out to be the difference in the game. And Ed Orgeron, man, he's got some splaining to do.
They were down 24-7. This team was down 24-7. They switched the quarterback. They went to Brennan. They brought back in Edling. It was too little too late. There's no reason that an LSU team that consistently recruits in the top 5 of the country, even with the coaching change at the top, there is no excuse for them to lose to a team like Troy at home. They just about lost last week to Syracuse, right? And this guy, Ed Orgeron,
it's a 2-point game.
They signed him to a 4-year contract.
You want to go over his buyout? What's his buyout?
$12 million.
Unbelievable.
$12 million. So if you're LSU right now, how do you get this thing turned around? They're playing a ton of young guys, but these young guys aren't getting better. They're not competing. And what I really see on this football team is a lack of leadership. This is the upperclassmen. They got to get a hold of this situation and hold these kids accountable. And some of the comments that you hear from the players after the game, single-handedly calling out these younger players, saying they're not practicing right, they're not doing the things off the field that they need to do in order to compete on Saturdays. And who does that fall on? It's Orgeron.
It falls
like
on
he's
the
lost
coach.
control.
Well, I'll tell you what, they lost 5 defensive starters to the NFL. And watching last night's game, particularly in the fourth quarter, Troy's lines, both offensive and defense, were dominating play. How does that happen? I know you lost the 5 guys to the NFL, but it's unconscionable that Troy can win the line of scrimmage in that game. LSU's defensive line looked flat out tired. This kid Chun just was just breaking tackles, making yardage out of nothing. He ran for 190 yards in the game. How does that happen
against it? When was the last time
LSU?
When was the last time LSU gave up 200 yards rushing to an opponent at home?
I
could not even tell you when. I don't even think Alabama's done it in recent memory. I mean, that's where they hang their hat. You're not going to be able to run the football. We're going to play lights out defense, and we're going to run the football. They can't do any of that.
First season of Houston. I know it's a little.
Well, Orgeron is too. How's that working out for him?
Good point. Okay.
Just saying,
All right. Texas Pete scoreboard. Spice up your tailgate with Texas Pete. Want to take you back to the big board. Texas A&M knocks off South Carolina 24-17. Freshman quarterback Kellen Mond, another nice game, threw for 159, ran for 95. Keith Ford at the end of this game, he took over in the second half. He was a man, ran for 70 yards and a couple of scores. Aggies had to overcome a really difficult targeting call on freshman wide receiver Cameron Buckley, who laid this kid out with a block, clearly targeting. It was nice to see the officials get it right, but it happened on a play in which Texas A&M scored. So instead of the touchdown that tied the game, goes back to the 16-yard line. They score anyway. I don't know where you want to start with this game, but let me talk about John Chavis. Last week, I criticized him, saying, where's the John Chavis defenses we saw when he was at Tennessee and LSU that were these dominating defenses? Last night in the second half, that Aggie defense reminded me of the old Wrecking Crew days. They were all over the football field.
How do you think Jake Bentley feels this morning?
Bad. 7 sacks. Oh, he's hurt. He is hurt.
And here's the thing. It wasn't outside of the final drive where they blitz quite a bit.
LSU needs Tommy Tuberville, by the way.
Tommy Tubbs.
Sorry, Eric. Not going to happen.
Real quick. Can we pause?
Yeah, sorry.
Early on in the year when I was all gung-ho on Tommy Tuberville, right, as an analyst, you said, well, wait a second here, blah, blah, blah. He's not getting much better. You're
admitting this.
I'm admitting just from being around him, I thought that that he would figure it out. He's not figuring it out. He's not the best analyst in the world. So maybe getting back into coaching. But if he does, it's going to be at a small school. I don't know that any big school is going to give him an opportunity to get back out.
But we digress.
I just had to
talk about the A&M defense.
Yeah, A&M defense. So the whole game they didn't blitz, right? They just relied on their front four.
Yep.
And they just whipped them, man. I mean, from a man-to-man. In Texas A&M, they put the athletes in the NFL. So they have the talent up front. So when you watch them week in, week out, you're like, where are these guys? They didn't have to blitz against South Carolina last week. I don't know if they looked at the tape and they said, we can play these guys straight up. But they were unbelievable last night.
Do you know how many yards South Carolina had rushing?
I would say under 50.
23.
Wow. Not going to win many football games like that.
And they're really missing Debo Samuel. I mean, that injury.
He's everything.
He
was
was
their
everything
offense.
to that team. They killed him.
Right.
I want to ask you this. How much credit do you give to Kevin Sumlin? Because they lose that UCLA game in just the most horrific sort of way. And they fought back to win their next 4 games. And, by the way, Sumlin was coaching injured last night. He got hurt during practice, hurt the ankle, so he was limping noticeably. He played through it.
I noticed that when they were interviewing him after the game, he was grimacing a little bit. So that's
Played through it. How much credit do you give him, though?
I give him a lot of credit.
Now, not for the injury and overcoming that.
No. I'm a Kevin Sumlin fan. I really am. I've always liked him. I think the freshman at quarterback, with some of the young playmakers they have, they're going to continue to get better. He's going to coach him up. I think you stay the course with Kevin Sumlin. I really do. I think you give him another year, see what he can do recruiting in that hotbed of Texas. Bringing some of these players in. You're going to get some players that would typically go to LSU. They might not be going to LSU anymore, so believe me, there's going to be some folks down in Louisiana trying to get some of these kids. And I give Kevin Sumlin another year and see what but you're going to find out the barometer this Saturday of where they are as a program.
They welcome
as they host Alabama.
The Tide.
Right.
Yeah.
21-point favorite.
College Station is a crazy place, and I don't put anything
12th man was off the chain last night.
They really were. I think that game could be a little closer than you would think, but Alabama's playing at such a high level. I'm not sure that at the end of the day, A&M can stay within 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, I thought the story of the game last night was A&M's defensive front. They dominated the game. They didn't allow any running yards whatsoever and put pressure on Bentley all night long. And if they can do any of that against Alabama's offensive line, I think it's a good indication that things at Texas A&M are going in the right direction because they're so young offensively.
Love the comment from Biz Renrut. Please see UGA Tennessee score for what is expected in Jacksonville later this year.
Man, there are going to be some it's going to be an interesting thing because, Florida's got LSU next week. And LSU, They're not very good. So Florida's still going to be in first place when these two teams
Should
meet.
be 4-0. All right, since you brought that up, Texas Pete scoreboard, spice up your tailgate with Texas Pete. Florida knocks off Vanderbilt in the Swamp yesterday morning. Rainy day, 38-24 is the final count. At the end of the day, in the second half, when Vandy started to wear down, Florida just took advantage. Of course, the big news from this game is Luke Del Rio, broken collarbone. He's done for the season. Felipe Franks comes in, steps up, has a nice little game.
Yeah, it helps when you got a running back like Davis.
Yeah, 124 yards.
He's a real deal, man. Offensively, a lot of these guys have had to step up for Florida. With the suspensions early on, the lack of playmakers, they've had to have guys step up, and now you lose, a quarter. Whatever happened to Malik Zaire? Is he just completely done? Do you think if he had to transfer over
again? He would be the
again?
guy that you would give a shot in that game. Why go back to Felipe Franks when you pretty much said he is not our guy? I thought maybe they'd give Zaire a shot. Yeah, I don't know.
I think it has to do with practice during the week.
It must.
And some things that, that McElwain's not talking about. But, hey, Franks is your guy moving forward the rest of the year. And if Florida, doesn't win the Georgia game and they're not in the SEC championship, it's a good opportunity for Franks to learn on the go. So next year you go in, there's no question for once in Gainesville who your starting quarterback is. You go recruit some playmakers. You say, look, we got a quarterback. They're going to have a defense. So maybe use this opportunity. I can't believe I'm talking about a team that's, 3-0 in the SEC about how, I'm already throwing dirt on them. Yeah. But I think if the reality of the situation is if you put Georgia and Florida on the same field right now, I think Georgia would take care of them by about 14, 17, 21 points. I really do. I think it would be that one.
Well, we're going to get to see it, but remember, Jim McElwain, I said it last week, he's the luckiest coach in America. And the luck to me is now he's facing an LSU team that is just completely down on its luck. 3-0 in the conference, likely to go 4-0. Florida's got a favorable schedule coming up. The Georgia game, obviously, they're going to be a big-time underdog in that game. But McElwain's teams just find a way to eke out victories.
They do.
I just never count them out, especially a rivalry game. We're looking ahead to that Florida-Georgia game. It is a rivalry game. Funny things happen.
I'm telling you, Kirby,
in the Gator Bowl.
I just have a feeling that Kirby, much like the Tennessee game, the Mississippi State, he's got these guys so dialed in. They're talking about, obviously, Vanderbilt right now, getting ready for that game, and then Missouri. But there's no question you can't help but look ahead at that matchup against Florida, and Kirby playing at Georgia, knowing how important that rivalry is. He's the new sheriff in town. He wants to set the tone in this rivalry. It's been so one-sided going back to Spurrier. He wants to turn the tides on that. And if he did that, if he won 2 and 3 in a row against Georgia, something Mark Richt could never do, they'll never get him out of Athens.
Right.
You know what I mean? They really wouldn't.
I agree. Ken Saghini says Zaire was terrible at Michigan, worse than Franks. I'm not going to argue that point, but a senior.
He's at Notre Dame.
No, but the opening game.
Oh, against Michigan. Oh, yeah. He only played like one series, didn't he?
He didn't play very much, yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know. This season, it seems like we are shaking out in some definitive paths, but then something's going to come up to just change everything.
Right. It's all about, arrows pointing up. Right. Arrows pointing up, arrows pointing down as programs, not just this year. You know what I mean? Like if you look at a team like LSU, obviously their arrow's pointing down, but it's pointing down for the long term. You're like, how long is it going to take to get this turned around? And I can't believe we're having this conversation about LSU less than a year removed from Les Miles. They're in serious trouble here.
5 games into the season.
Right. Tennessee, last year, this is a preseason top 10 team, right? They're going, how long is it going to take to turn that train wreck around? You're talking about 2, 3, 4 years, right? So, in Georgia's arrow obviously clearly pointing up. Auburn pointing up. So, it's going to make for a very interesting final half of the season.
All right, let's take you back to the Texas Pete scoreboard. Spice up your tailgate with Texas Pete. A couple of other games to get to. Arkansas knocks off New Mexico State 42-24. Big win for Brett Bielema. Everything shook out just right in this game. Took a 21-0 lead and never looked back. Austin Allen throws for 264, 3 TDs. Whaley runs for 119. Anything you want to say about this game?
Yeah, they're looking ahead. They get back in their SEC next week on the road at South Carolina. Big game for both programs. Arkansas defensively, that's going to be their problem. Week after week, can they hold opponents? And what a better opportunity to get your defense right than go up against a anemic offense of South Carolina?
Well, Arkansas still has Alabama and Auburn on the schedule, but the way the SEC is shaking out, the rest of the games now, Hans, are all looking winnable. You got LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Missouri, still have Coastal Carolina and the South Carolina game. I could see a scenario where they're going to lose the Alabama and Auburn game. South Carolina's a toss-up, but they could finish the season with 7 or 8 wins, and I'm not even sure that I thought that was possible at the start of the year.
That's a good point. I think the big one there is the South Carolina Mississippi State games where they could go either way. You find a way to win, and Ole Miss, but the Mississippi State and South Carolina game, I think those are 3 very evenly matched football teams. If you find a way to win both of those, all of a sudden you got a little bit of momentum, and you could possibly be looking at a 3rd place finish in the SEC West.
And that would certainly bode well for Brett Bielema, whose seat has gotten very hot. Take you back to the Texas Pete scoreboard. Spice up your tailgate with Texas Pete. The one game we haven't talked about, Kentucky a winner, 24-14 over
They had to sweat it out, man. They had to sweat it out.
24-20, I should say, was the final count. That Mark Stoops' team improves to 4-1. In this game, Hans lost the turnover battle, had fewer yards, fewer first downs, but they get the W. Mike Edwards coming up with that big interception at the end of the game. Wildcats only allowed 13 yards rushing. This is another team, Kentucky, that can put up 7 or 8 wins again this year. I don't believe they're going to be able to compete with Georgia, compete in the SEC East, but they keep making incremental steps at Kentucky, and 8 wins at Kentucky is a heck of a lot better than 8 wins at Tennessee.
8 wins sounds nice. I think they take it every single year going into it. Big punt block in that game to set up a touchdown, obviously becoming was the difference in that one. But Kentucky, they could be 5-0, man.
Right.
I mean, you're thinking about that. If they just had 11 guys on the field, Bob, you're allowed to play with 11. I suggest you play with 11. A tough break for those kids last week. And I think you saw in this game, you mentioned how they were outgained yardage. It was almost a one-sided game to an extent, but it just shows you how emotional this game can be and how big of a letdown it was losing that football game last week for Kentucky.
All right, I got to
Good news is they got Mizzou next week, though.
They could be 6-0 if they won that Florida
unbelievable,
game taking
right?
on Mizzou. Got to give a big-time shout-out to Brian Coburn. Every game is a great game if you are eating with Texas Pete.
Oh, yeah. I'm taking this bottle home with me right now. I'm putting it on whatever my wife's making for lunch.
You can take one of the bottles from the case in the back, but you can't take that bottle.
Okay, that's fair enough. I'm taking a bottle home with me.
We can do that. Great on wings, just saying. Game balls. Let's hand out some game balls, both offensively and defensively. What do you think?
I'm going to go with Stidham with Auburn yesterday, showing that he can throw the football. Those 4 big passes over 45 yards yesterday. That's just good. They can run the ball. They got 3 or 4 running backs. They're going to, pound it for a couple hundred yards a game. But this was the game that I think Auburn fans have been looking for. I think that he proved himself that he's the real deal. He's going to keep getting better. So I give him the ball offensively, and defensively, I give it to the whole Texas A&M front. That defensive line was dominant in that football game.
Wrecking Crew. Remember the old Wrecking Crew? You might be too young to
I might be too young. I'm a greenhorn. Not quite a millennial, but I'm a greenhorn.
Bruce is chiming in. Texas Pete is my favorite. Kind of like the Bulldogs and the Trojans. Troy Trojans. Hot and tastes good. Coach that is smiling the most this morning.
Kirby, man. Did you see at the end of the game where he was pumping up his players, went over, kissed Isaiah Wynn? I mean, he's been preaching to these kids, trying to get them to buy in, and all of a sudden everything is just exactly the way he wanted it. He's embarrassing Tennessee in Knoxville, talking about coaches getting fired. Now, he doesn't want to see a co-worker get fired like that, but to embarrass Tennessee in Knoxville to cause their head coach to get fired, those are the kind of things that the Georgia alumni and fan base are just so excited about. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And do it back to back, and these guys are buying into him. He's got to be feeling good. If there were any doubters about whether he was the right guy for the job, what do you say? How do you dispute that at this point?
I was talking to some of the younger guys in our room back here, the writer types. No, but they're thinking, well, when Georgia hired Kirby Smart, this is a couple of weeks ago, this argument took place, or this discussion. When Georgia hired Kirby Smart, they should have looked at Justin Fuente. He had a better record at Memphis State, blah, blah, blah. Kirby had never been a head coach before. They really needed to look at him, and they kind of blew it on that. And I'm thinking, no, they hired the guy that fit with the culture, Georgia ties, that had worked with Nick Saban for a decade. Even though he had never been a head coach before, he was the guy for the job. And how you didn't see that, Georgia, give him credit.
Right.
They went out and got the guy that fit.
And I think that they wanted him just a year before that. Now, I think Rick just would have a little bit.
Greg McGarity couldn't pull the trigger at that point.
Right, for the buyout and all the other stuff. But I think that Kirby was the guy that they had earmarked all along. And for them, it was probably better off that the longer that he spent with Saban and seeing how that program was run, right, the better for the University of Georgia. So here we go again. You brought up a great point, Bob. Didn't have any head coaching experience. Young guy. Can recruit. Can really relate to the players. Who else did that? Was it Dabo? Does he kind of fit that mold as well?
Dabo. Hey, you want to go back in Georgia history, Vince Dooley.
Right.
Vince Dooley had no head coaching experience.
Right.
And he came in and did a pretty good job.
Yeah, but Vince Dooley, same guy, wanted to put Herschel Walker at linebacker. Yeah, he told Deion Sanders he was going to redshirt him his freshman year. So let's pump the brakes a little bit on Vince.
Our buddy Brian now says the entire Tennessee team needs some Texas Pete. Yeah.
Do we even have to answer the question as far as coach that didn't sleep well last night?
Do we have?
Oh, well, that's true.
Talking about Butch Jones?
It's 1A and 1B. Either one of them. I think Ogeron had a couple cocktails and just called it a night.
Yeah, Ed was snoring last night.
I think Butch shows his emotions, you know. So I think Butch is probably
That's a good point.
Very stressed out, sitting on the couch alone, just thinking about, you know, what network he wanted to go with next year.
You think Orgeron would make a good network analyst for ESPN?
Sideline reporter. I want to see. Let's throw it down to Ed.
None of us will know what he's saying.
Right, no have any idea what he's saying. Let's throw it back down to Ed. No clue.
I want to get back to a coach that's smiling because you said Kirby, and there's no doubt Kirby all smiles this morning. But I think Gus Malzahn had to wake up feeling pretty good this morning because his offense has been questioned by me, by you, and Chip Lindsey, week by week, seems to be putting this offensive game plan together to where now you gotta really worry about not only the running game but Jarrett Stidham. Man, he is on fire. The Clemson game to start the season, he spent the entire game on his back, but you give him some time to throw, and he's completing passes the last 3 games at over a better than 80% clip.
Yeah, he's getting protection as well. He's a guy who can extend plays with his feet, but he's getting protection. He's staying in the pocket, and credit to their playmakers getting down the field. If they're having to drop back and account for these wide receivers that are making these big plays over the top, that's just going to open up more things for their running game. And if they're able to run the ball, slow the clock, that defense is going to take care of the rest. I mean, offensively, Georgia, I wouldn't consider them an offensive juggernaut at this point, but I think offensively, Alabama's really the only team that might be able to move the ball consistently against Auburn. I mean, look at how dynamic Clemson is on offense. They put up 14 points. So, I mean, this defense for Auburn is the real deal.
You know, if you want to look at any stumbling blocks along the way, in Georgia's case, you've got to look at Florida.
Sure.
It's your rival. The history is not good for Georgia, at least not the recent history. What do you look at for Auburn?
They have 3 road games in a row, which it doesn't matter who you're playing. There are 3 SEC road games in a row. So that's going to be tough. And I'm trying to remember the 3 they got. They have at LSU, at Arkansas, and at Texas A&M. That's not an easy slate.
No.
You know, that's saying something. If you can go through that undefeated and unscathed, you're working with something special. And so I think that's the big – I know it's not one particular game, but the row of those 3 SEC road games in a row, that's going to be tough for anybody. Even Alabama. That's tough to go on the road and win 3 in a row like that.
All right, if you had a vote in the AP or the coaches poll, you got Alabama ranked number 1, right?
I think Alabama and Clemson are 1A, 1B.
Okay, that's my thought as well. Who's number 3?
Number 3 right now? It's interesting.
Because I'm thinking you can make the case for Georgia being number 3. If I had a vote, I would put the Dogs number 3 right now.
And I think a lot of people are. I would not be surprised if they jumped into the top 5 this week. We know USC lost on Friday night.
They're number 7.
You showed me it was Friday.
Yes,
I wanted to say Thursday. I couldn't help myself. Remember when they used to play college football on Thursdays till the NFL took over? It was always a good game. Now Fridays, so but no, USC they lose, so you got to think Georgia's going to jump up 1. That leaves Washington, Penn State ahead of them, as well as Oklahoma, and then the aforementioned, Auburn and Clemson.
Well, you've watched more of the national games than I have. You put Georgia and Penn State, or you put Georgia and Washington on a neutral site. I'm not sure how you don't take Georgia at this point, just because of the physicality and athleticism of their defense.
Yeah,
I don't think those other 2 teams can compare.
That's the one thing when I watched Washington play a couple weeks ago that really jumped out to me was their defense. You don't see Pac-12 teams play defense the way Washington is this year. They're physical, they're fast. They got probably 3 or 4 guys back there that are going to play on Sundays in the NFL. So they do kind of compare with Georgia a little bit. They don't run the ball as well as Georgia, but they're the real deal. I think as a whole, that conference is kind of going down a little bit. I mean, Washington State had a big win, but they finish up with, I want to say, 5 of their last 7 games are on the road. They've played all home games to this point, so I don't think they're going to be there. You saw USC get exposed. I think, without question, Washington's the team. They're going to be in the playoffs.
All right. At the beginning of the year, if someone would have said to me, what's the best conference in college football objectively, I'm thinking it's the ACC. But
interesting.
5 weeks into the season, I can easily make the case for the SEC with those 3 teams, Auburn, Georgia, and Alabama at the top, because there's not a conference in America that is matching those 3.
No. Who's 4? Florida? I mean,
really.
Yeah,
there's a big gap.
Right.
There's a big gap, and then there's Florida.
But I think there's a big...
maybe Texas A&M.
Right, it's a good point. But I think you see a big drop-off in all conferences now. I think college football is becoming extraordinarily top-heavy. And while you might have a couple teams that come in year to year and have special seasons, Mississippi State a couple years ago, whatever the case may be, it's getting very top-heavy, where you're dealing with essentially 8 to 10 programs every single year that are in the conversation. And I think for Georgia to be in that conversation, their fan base will tell you, this is where we belong. We belong in this conversation. Our athletic facilities are top-notch. We're in the top recruiting hotspot in the entire nation. Year after year after year, we get these kids in here. And it's about time we start coaching them up and competing for national championships.
It's funny, you talked about Mel Tucker earlier, and perhaps he's the next guy that gets a head coaching gig.
Right.
Is he being looked at by some schools as that guy? Offensively, Jim Chaney's not going anywhere.
Right.
As long as Kirby Smart will have him, he's going to be the offensive coordinator. It's interesting because Mel Tucker's name hasn't come up very much. Is he a guy that other programs are starting to look at?
I would think so. I would talk to him, especially if I was a team, that I knew offensively I was going to be able to recruit the right kind of talent, and I needed to be a little bit more structured and sound on the defensive side of the football. He's absolutely a guy I would let do that and then delegate those offensive responsibilities to an expert. But find out what he's all about.
Yep.
Find out what he's all about and see if he's a guy.
I'll be honest. I don't know enough about Mel Tucker at this point.
Nor do I. But I'm having a conversation.
Study this week. I'm going to study.
So next week when we come in here, we better be ready for Mel Tucker.
We will be Mel Tucker. I'm going to try to call him on the phone.
We should have him on after the Vanderbilt game next week.
What's he doing Sunday morning?
Fine. We'll get to the bottom of it.
What time do they look at tape?
I'm going to get so involved with
Mark,
Mel
what time do
Tucker's
the
life.
Bulldogs look at tape? Mark knows everything UGA. Are we good at 10 o'clock? Are they looking at maybe 9 and then we can have Mel at 10? All right.
Thumbs up all the way across the board. So look for that next week. That'll be exciting.
Tyrone Royal says Mercer forced, this is talking about Auburn, into 5 turnovers, and 24-10 was the final. It's funny how just a couple of weeks ago we're talking about how bad Auburn's offense is and surviving a team like Mercer, and now they're like, oh, they're a top 10 team.
But here's the thing. When you're playing schools like Mercer and you're playing teams like Samford, you're trying out things. You're not showing your hands for the big game. That would be stupid on your part. You have the talent where if you just lined up and wanted to beat these guys in the brains, you could. So you're working on things and you're trying to get better as a team from those football games. And you look at Georgia, Jake Fromm, right? The game against Samford, he had that play on the fumble on the sidelines there where he tried to jump on the ball, something you never do. Right. That's a learning opportunity. That's what those games are for. It's for the young guys to learn from those mistakes, so when you go and you play these tougher games, you're battle tested and you're ready. Jake Fromm just played on the road in the SEC in front of 105,000 people and won the game. So anything from here on out as far as the moment being too big for him, I don't think you're going to see.
You think he was a little nervous at the start of the game, and that pass he got picked off, just a terrible pass, had to do a little bit with some early nerves before 105,000?
No question. What were you doing when you were 19? You don't have to answer it, Bob.
You don't want to know.
You don't have to answer that. But, I mean, really, a 19-year-old kid to go into a building like that, and the expectations that come along. It's like you're going to win. You got some great guys with you, but it's easier said than done. I think what he did yesterday was just speaks volumes to what kind of guy he is, what kind of leader he is, the intangibles that you want from a quarterback.
All right, before we go, I do want to go back to the Texas Pete scoreboard. Spice up your tailgate with Texas Pete. Look ahead to the key games next week. We talked about the Alabama-LSU game, Alabama-Texas A&M. LSU is playing at Florida. Those are going to be 2 pretty good games next week to keep an eye on. Georgia at Vanderbilt. Not sure how close a game this is going to be. And then Ole Miss at Auburn.
LSU, Florida. What in God's green earth has happened to this football game? I mean, you remember that was like one of the top 3 matchups of the year, right? And here, I can tell you one thing. Since it's the 3:30 CBS game, it's going to be a horrible football game. Think about the last 2 CBS games.
Is that the 3:30 game?
Yes. Think about the last 2 you've had. You had 59-0, 41-0. So that is a combined 100. 59 and 41 is 100. 100-0 combined scores for CBS the last 2 weeks. That's not good for ratings.
No.
It's not good for business.
We were talking about Tennessee hitting rock bottom. Lance Garner says Missouri. Don't forget about Missouri.
Well, yeah. I mean, they're not even an FBS team at this point. My buddy yesterday watching the Georgia game, at the very end, they were playing Rocky Top going to break, whatever, whether it was being sarcastic or what at this point. And he says, you know what? He said, that's only the second time I've heard this song all game long. He's like, they play at the beginning and then they just played it. That was it. So think about that. You go up into Neyland and you don't even have to hear Rocky Top because you're beating them so bad.
Well, they did play it a few more times, but yeah,
you know what I mean.
It was palatable with the score at 41-0. You could take it in.
One quick thing on Butch Jones. Earlier in the week, the paranoia, thing at the media desk, talking to the folks to me about the fake news and how it's not fair and all that stuff. It was very awkward, right? So if you go to the Knoxville newspaper today, the very first story, it's not about Georgia's defense. It's not about Tennessee's shortcomings. The very first thing you click on, the headline, is a video of the Georgia football team with all their fans celebrating in Neyland Stadium. There's no comments. There's no nothing. They're just saying, here it is. Here's your fake news.
Picture will tell 1,000 words, right?
Right. So they have an agenda, to say the least. They're not happy with the way things are going, nor should they be.
You ready to wrap this up?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, Bob.
I'm not here next week. I think.
Wait a second. You just said we were breaking down Mel Tucker. Are you giving me the okie doke?
Yeah, you know what? Mel, can we do it 2 weeks from today? I think probably try to get Matt Stewart in here.
Okay, that'll be fun.
Okay with that?
Yeah, I'm good. This is the same guy that made the proclamation that Vanderbilt was going to give Alabama a game.
Yes.
This ought to be a heck of a show. Be sure to tune in next week.
All right, so it'll be Hans and a guest still to be determined, probably Matt Stewart.
Or Mel Tucker. We don't know yet.
We'll see if we can get Mel. 10 o'clock next Sunday. Thanks for joining us. Enjoyed the Texas Pete show. Don't forget, Texas Pete. Everything tastes better with Texas Pete on it. We'll see you next Sunday.
Thanks, Bob.
Anyway, we'll see you.